Welcome to the American Operator Podcast, where small businesses are the heartbeat of America. I'm Joseph Cabrera, and we dive into the stories of owners and operators who build and keep our communities thriving. Whether you're new to business or already in the trenches, we'll share the hard-earned wisdom, triumphs, and challenges with running a business in this great country. Let's get to work. All right, team, welcome back to another episode of the American Operator. We're doing something different today. Doing a little team room session. What does that mean? It means you get to look behind the curtain with some of my favorite people here on my team that I work with every day on a myriad of things. Most importantly, everybody pointed towards helping pass the torch to the new aspiring owner-operators here in our country, keeping the fabric of America strong. And who better than to have on the show than my colleague and buddy, Judd Goodrich. How are you, my friend?
Doing great. Thanks for having me.
Man, it's good to have you, and I'm glad we can make this work out. We actually had to bump this once because
A couple times.
Life got busy, man. Me and him were traveling. I actually literally a few minutes before we rolled live here, I was flying in from North Carolina at an armed services and a aspiring owner operator ETA kind of group thing going out there at Duke. Actually, some really great people out there that we met, salt of the earth. Have you been to Duke before?
I've never been to Duke, no.
Never have I.
How was it?
Oh, man. It's like someone cut a piece of New England and put it inside North Carolina. And I hope that's a compliment for anybody that's listening right now. Like, I mean that in the best. I got the back end of, like, the colors.
Yeah.
Like, the fall colors coming through. Campus is gorgeous. It's like red brick and Gothic. It just kind of, they make that work. And I had a few minutes to kill before the event, and before I met up with some of the veterans and some of the students out there that are looking to get into this world of ownership, and went to go visit the Duke Chapel. Mm-hmm. Man, I mean, that thing is, first of all, it looks like they should film a scene from Batman there. Like, it's very Gotham feeling, stained glass, enormous. It's got to, I mean, I don't even think they call it a cathedral or like, what do you call that? Like one of the, I don't even think you call it a major, they just call it a chapel.
Yeah.
And you go in there and the thing is unreal, man. Last thing that I'll say, and then we can jump back into more important business here. But so I was in there touring around and I saw a sign off to the side that goes crypt. And I mean, and it was open.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure if I was allowed to go down there, but I did. And they have all the old presidents and founders buried underneath there in their tombs.
And you can just walk in there.
I wasn't sure if I was allowed to, but I did.
Yeah.
And so, nobody chased me down. But it was, and actually not as, it's kind of what you would expect it to look like. At the same time, again, goes back to like, that's what you would expect to see somewhere in the Northeast or something. So anyway, It was awesome. Great people, man. But it was good to get back here on time. And I was like, we are not shifting this thing again. So thanks again, man, for us continuing to stay on. What are we going to talk about today? A couple things, I think. One, let's talk about Judd first. I think folks would gain a big benefit understanding just kind of some more of our teammates and who work here tirelessly behind the scenes to kind of keep operators and great businesses and the capital that needs to kind of make that happen all kind of come together.
Yeah.
So Judd, just tell folks a little bit about where you grew up. Mm-hmm. Probably, and what do you do here at the company?
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in the great state of Minnesota.
Great state of Minnesota.
Yeah, so MN Lake life. So I lived there all the way through college, went to school at University of Minnesota, then moved out, packed up the car, decided I needed to get out of the cold, moved to California. And like during that time, I actually spent a number of years at a company called Carta, and basically like our whole vision of the business, and now it's a relatively large company. When I started, it was decently small startup. But basically the idea is to increase access of ownership, mostly focused on, angel, venture-backed businesses and increase like the transparency kind of across the board. So there it was great because I probably met maybe like 2,000 founders. I think that also made me a little bit jaded with the venture-backed startup life just because the likelihood of success is relatively low. But during that time, that incredible amount of founders, operators, a lot of venture capitalists, basically worked on every single business unit of that team. A lot of times when we would spin out a new product or offering, I would be on like the leading go-to-market team, right? So basically figuring out how to sell this, how to build the product, what do the clients really need, what's going to be the most valuable. And then, probably 4 or 5 years later, wound up getting an in mail from Will Fry saying, "Hey, I'm building this new thing." It was relatively jaded, as I mentioned. They didn't have a website at the time. Said that they were about to raise some capital. I've heard that many times before. So I actually joined as like a go-to-market consultant just to get an idea of what it would be like working here. And within the first month, it was very clear that the opportunity was high. The team was going to be able to execute against this, and the mission statement has aligned to what I've done historically, and what I believe in is if you have ownership in businesses and in ventures, the opportunity to have a life-changing changes from that perspective is quite high. So
that it sounds like you your sniff test meter of is this going to be legit or not was pretty stringent, pretty rigid, because you've seen so many different types of businesses that when you eventually did say yes to main shares, it sounded like more than a gut check. This was the right call.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think a big thing that you can look across leaders is their ability to execute, right? And it's at early stage execution can come in the form of like very tedious tasks to like very high strategic work, right? And like that's something I was looking for early on, and like the ability to execute from leadership here is incredible, right? So you're going to get some stuff done when you have a founder that's doing data entry at midnight to get something out for a client just because it needs to happen, right? And you create processes and you make it a lot better, but it was very clear. Yeah,
the train moves hard here, man, for sure. So talk to me just real quick, going back to the Midwest, Minnesota, growing up. How do you feel like living maybe just even culturally in that world helps you with kind of engaging with folks who want to invest in SMB, folks who are doing small business, folks who are operating? Did that help at all?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think like the general, obviously people think about like Minnesota nice, but I think it goes further than that. It's a lot of like empathy, right? And I think being empathetic across the board, if you're looking to buy a business from a business owner that's been operating for 40 years, right? Like you have to have a lot of empathy into that situation. It's wildly challenging for them to say, "Hey, I'm done.
Yeah.
And I'm going to pass over this legacy." Maybe it's been passed down for a handful of generations to someone that they're just meeting, over a coffee, a couple months. So I think there's a lot of that, and I think it's also what we've really tried to do here is just like doing what's right, and going a little bit of the extra mile. Right. I think that's carried a tremendous amount of goodwill, especially as early days we didn't have everything built out. Right? We didn't have hundreds of investors that are looking to invest into deals. We had a handful. So then we would do whatever it took to help people buy these businesses. If it took calling into New Jersey to figure out, okay, what licenses do they need? Okay, well, let's find the paperwork. Let's fill out the paperwork on behalf of this buyer, whatever it took. And I think that's like very in tune with, people from Minnesota in general.
Yeah. No,
maybe my parents,
Yeah, no. I mean, I having Midwesterners in my life now, along with having some good friends from the great state of Minnesota.
Yeah.
You recognize it's nice, man, but it's not like it's not empty nice though. I think empathy is a strong suit, and also I recognize folks are just very industrious. Like they all are hardworking folks and like want to get stuff done. So talking about a lean for execution, I can imagine that resonates well. When you think about, let's do this now.
Yeah.
What's Judd do here? And you just you don't just hang out.
Yeah, totally. So the role as head of capital markets, what that really means is I'm basically responsible for all the deals that we decide to ultimately partner on and help people raise capital for. Right. So what that looks like, and it can happen in a lot of different capacities. It can be, hey, someone is like, I want to go and execute against this thesis, right? I think HVAC businesses are really intriguing, and I'm starting to look at some deals, right? So in early days, we would do a lot of deal reviews with folks to kind of be a soundboard to say, hey, like, what would we think about this opportunity? What questions should you be asking to the broker or to the seller? Okay, now we're to the spot where we're on site and we want to formulate an offer. All right, okay, what offer really makes sense and you have a path towards financing it? And that's really around like the LOIs. And then it's all the way to queuing up the deal team, right? I need a quality of earnings lender. I need a legal, actual attorney that knows M&A securities laws, to lending partners, and then
I'm sorry, I'm
ultimately,
smiling because we've seen the like, what do you call it? The accident lawyer that comes
Yeah.
in, or like a divorce lawyer. It's not quite the right pick.
yeah, it totally, and it happens, right? So we will help assemble these teams, and then ultimately set people up to be able to efficiently raise capital, which a lot of that work is done on the front end. Picking the right opportunities that have a higher likelihood of being financed, and then so a lot of what we built out is supporting operators, searchers, sponsors through the various stages of what it takes to actually execute and buy a business, and then I also kind of sit on the side of the investors, right? So I scaled out a majority of our investing community over the last couple of years. Obviously we need capital to finance these transactions, and it's a relatively challenging solve, because right now, say we have a dozen different deals, they're all different sizes, they're different industries, and some of them have different. Some of them are distributing cash regularly. Others are, they're growing the businesses and they're trying to, sell these eventually, right? So that's all of a sudden becomes relatively challenging to find the right capital. So I do spend a lot of time with various investors, from owner operators, right? A lot of times these are viewed as strategic capital, where they can, write checks, but also be like a sound board, right? I've been operating, a staffing company for the last 20 years. I've learned a couple of things, right? Maybe I'm going to put in $250,000, but you call me if you have, challenges that you're trying to solve for, all the way to, larger, more family office type and everything in between, which then basically gives us a really good scope into what do people care about, right? And if you think about an investor, they serve a lot of different capacities, but one of them is they should be very aligned with the outcome, right? So feedback about the deal of something they like or don't like is directly impacting you as the individual, right? So we're basically using these investors as a feedback loop to figure out, okay, what are the best deals, and what questions should you ask, and what are actual red flags that could sink the ship. So it's both on the working with people to help them set up capital raises, and then also ensuring that we have sufficient capital on the other side.
Yeah. Do you find that these investors are generally optimistic about investing in small business?
Yeah, I think you have to start thinking about the different personas of these investors. The reality is it's not as solidified as a market as say real estate, of course.
Yeah.
Right? Everyone is, a lot of people have been doing that for 20, 30, 50 years, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
So everyone kind of thinks about it a little bit differently. The ones that are optimistic probably had a good outcome, right? They've
had an experience that went well.
Yeah, they bought a business, they invested into a business, sold pretty quickly, or maybe the business just performed really well.
Yeah.
A lot of other people are, maybe they made an investment or two, and they're still kind of waiting to see
how it turns out.
Oh yeah.
How many of those folks you think with the investors you speak with used to be operators, which is why maybe this is an interesting investment class for them?
I would say for active investors that are kind of known in the space,
yeah,
quite a few.
Yeah, so they've sat in the seat before. Yeah. So in a lot of ways, they already have this kind of intrinsic buy-in to this investment class.
Yeah, I think it's also a testament to show that it's not terribly easy operating a roofing company.
Yeah.
Right. After you do it, and I was talking to someone recently, is 10 years of operating this roofing company, and he's like, yeah, great outcome, but it was quite the journey. I would rather, passively invest into these opportunities, advise, where I'm not, under the gun of a PG until I'm ready to do so, right? And then you kind of see the transfer of operating, investing. Okay, now I'm ready to step back into an operating position.
Yeah, no, that's a good call out. I think you do find that there's a rare breed that will continue to operate after operate, whatever it might be, or grow. We have folks that are advisors and operators that do that. But you do see that a lot of folks, their second show is more in this investment or advising capacity, because they do recognize how much grit it is. What's something that you think folks getting into this world of becoming an owner probably underestimate. You talked about it being hard work, but like, can you just like double tap into that? Like when you say hard work, like, Judd, I've worked hard before. Like, what do you actually mean when you say that? Like, hey man, this is not an easy thing to get into.
On the actual operation side, or more on like
from what you've heard, just back from folks who've done it before. Like, what are the things that always stick with you as like, yeah, that is hard?
I think the human element is easily, for a lot of these businesses, especially I think the trend is a good amount of, B2B services, home services, it's all human capital, right? So it's individuals that you're working with, laborers you're working with. So I think it's wildly underestimated, right? I have a good friend who started up a moving company in Minnesota, Mini Movers, shout out.
Yes.
And so, now they have 50, 60 movers, a dozen different trucks. The reality is very challenging work, right? So now you have to think about who actually is able to move for 12 hours a day, thousands of pounds.
Yeah.
Right? It's people that are going to be gritty, but they're also occasionally not reliable, right? So if he's sending 50 people out, he might have to bring 3 or 4 just to the warehouse because inevitably every day 1 or 2 people don't show up. Right, so all of a sudden that becomes relatively challenging, and frustration kind of builds in. So then having like really strong managers and that can actually handle some negotiations with these workers becomes really helpful, right? So I think it's being able to interact with the types of clients that you're working with, the types of employees that you have is very key, and then. If that's not really your strong suit, you need to find incredible managers to do so. So I think if you think about, look at hundreds of pitch decks, most people are all talking about, okay, what are all the different ways that I can grow this business, right? And they're thinking about, okay, we're going to increase the SEO, we're going to increase marketing, et cetera, et cetera. No one's really talking about allocating a lot of resources on the hiring side. Okay, what happens if my GM goes out? And he decides he's gone. Do I have anyone to backfill that person?
Backfill, manage schedules.
The schedules, whatever it might be. But I think people that are really good at this, they're hyper focused on the people side and then the hiring as well. And they've done a great job at preparing themselves for it. So that really goes into their business plan and strategy are sound. They've talked to other owners, right? If they're stepping into a new space, it's pretty surprising, but a lot of people. So HVAC, for example, there's 147,000 HVAC businesses in the United States. I talked to maybe 10 people that are planning on buying HVACs, have HVAC businesses under contract. Only 2 of them ever talked to an HVAC owner, right?
Why do you think that's the case? Is there an aversion to hearing news that you don't want to hear? Why is that?
I mean, I think it's a good question. Why they don't? I think to the podcast, you should reach out. Because you can learn a lot of very intriguing things. But yeah, I don't know if I have a good answer of why they don't.
What's your gut say on it? Is it just it pencils on a spreadsheet, so why do I need to talk to anybody?
Yeah, or maybe a little bit of overconfidence. That it's if I talk to an owner that's been doing this for 20, 30 years, it's old school tactics.
Yeah,
I want to come in and I want to create some automation, workflows, bunch of change that's going to be a lot better than this old school operating business.
Yeah, we're going to throw some AI on it and it's going to fix it.
It's going to be sweet.
Yeah.
But the reality is a lot of these business owners, that have been around for multiple recessions, multiple depressions, these businesses have clearly figured out a way to make this thing work. And a lot of them, you're buying them because they have been really sustainable from a top line revenue, from a cash flow perspective, which means that they're likely going to be significantly better at operating this business than you are.
Yeah.
So I think it could be a little bit of overconfidence, but I think a lot of people, that's kind of how they do their research if they want to get into industry in the first place.
I had this thought. I've been working, I'm sure you do the same thing too. I think about different ways and analogies I can do to kind of help people understand that one, this stuff isn't easy, but also that it requires one of our values here is honor in the past, right? It's it requires this true reverence for what was built, but not in a I respect you and then let me move on, but more I respect you, but let me pay attention to why you did that. So I had this thought the other day. Actually, these small businesses remind me a lot of sports. The fundamental principles of baseball haven't really changed.
Yeah.
Right? There's a certain way you hold the bat. There's a certain way you kind of that the right person on first base is probably a lefty.
Yep.
There are certain different traits that a shortstop needs to be able to do. And more importantly, there's certain ways you read plays and like all that stuff, right? There's certain ways you set up and rack and stack a lineup, like all those things, right? What changes is like the incremental stuff. Like the helmet got a little bit easier, maybe the bat technology got a little bit more increased, but like nothing was immensely, nothing was changed overnight. They didn't start going from like using baseball bats to now like using this like mini club that like it's just like you know what I mean. There isn't like a whole new technique on that. Right. And I often think when new owners come in, they go like, "I'm changing the game," and it's like, "Well, like there's I'm sure new techniques in plumbing, but there is a way that it's been done for so long because at some point the way physics and gravity and Earth works when you're doing plumbing, it's just kind of established."
Yeah.
So I think about that. I don't know, does that stuff ever cross your mind that like,
oh yeah,
just trying to break the thought of like, look, I want you to be innovative and I want you to add your sauce and your hot sauce to getting this business spy step. But you got to remember, like, there are fundamentals to the game.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, if you think about it, like, if you talk to most like business owners that have gone into like, okay, acquired, displacing or like transitioning from like this existing owner, they commonly won't, they'll make comments about like change is challenging at every level, right? So you kind of have to understand when and why you're going to pick your battles.
Yeah.
But it's also like, to your point, right? You could easily ask why this system or this process is run this way, right? And understand like what was the philosophy behind it in the first place. Okay, maybe it actually makes a lot of sense because, now we're able to kind of weed out people that are ultimately never really gonna, get our service, buy our product, and we kind of have like an indication of why. Mm-hmm. Or you could say you sit next to them and you're like, well, maybe there's a better process to do so, and go back and try to figure out what that better process is and present it in a way that you get buy-in as well, because you can do all these cool things, but you have to convince a handful of people that have been doing something in a very specific way to do something different, right? So the positioning of that, I think, is key.
The human thing, right? Even if it is definitively and objectively a better way, to get 15 people on the team to do something that's been different just by nature is something that you're not going to gain buy-in on the first day by saying, we're just doing it different.
Yeah, and to add on to that, I think it's this interesting concept of like, say if you're able to create like a system or a process that decreases the amount of time it takes, maybe like an office manager, 50%, right? And you're like, oh, fantastic, I just saved them 50% of the time. What a lot of people would do is they'd go to that office manager and say like, okay, like I'm able to save 50% of your time. Like what could you do if you had 50% more time, right? In the first instinct that they're going to have is, well, first of all, I haven't really thought about that. So they're not going to have, a bunch of creative ideas, that you've just saved their time. It's more so going to be like job security.
Yeah.
Right. So instead, you could change that entire process up. It's like, we figured out a way to decrease the time. You come up with a handful of ideas for them, and you present those ideas first of like, would love for you, to work on X, Y, and Z. Is this something you'd be interested in? What else would you want to do that would be really intriguing that you haven't been able to do? And you kind of end with that. And then you can come in with the solution, right? Hey, let me show you this process. It's going to save you 50% time. Now you can actually do all these things that you just said that you'd be interested to do, right? It's a reframing to get the buy-in. But if you don't get the buy-in, then the likely low adoption.
Yeah, and or you just said something that I hadn't thought about, which is you could almost tee it up something positive in a way that someone goes like, "Are you going to fire me?" Like, wait, no, hold on, no, I'm not going to fire you. You're like, well, you just said you just remove 50% of my workload, and like, what's going to happen here? And I think you're right. You got to give them the light that goes like, dude, this would be awesome, right? Like, oh yeah, that'd be awesome if I had more time to do this. Cool. So now let's go do this, and it allows you to go do that. No, it's but that's all the human stuff that you talk about that I don't know any MBA book or, how to SMB thing is talking about. It's typically through talking to an owner or talking to folks who've done it before that'll give you those nuances about how and what to do. And asking a lot of good questions if you can afford to, which I think all of us can, especially before you go take on this multi-million-dollar thing that you're signing your name on. What do you, when you're, actually, we were catching up earlier, so I'd love to, if you don't mind, share like the day-to-day here at the company and on the team is awesome. There's no days the same, no opportunity in business and operators the same. It's almost this different like scientific chemistry set that we're putting together every single time, which makes it fun. Anything top of mind right now, and I'm kind of alluding to a little bit what we talked about earlier, like anything top of mind right now that just makes you go, yeah, that's an interesting either trend or pattern or conversation that I just had that's probably worth sharing with folks who might be considering this path.
Yeah. So it was actually with recently with like a business owner that had a successful exit. It wasn't a situation he necessarily wanted to exit out of, but either way, he learned a lot in the first couple years of like operating this CNC business, and I think you start realizing it's kind of back to your point that you don't have to recreate the wheel, but effectively he came in and he wanted to understand. Started with the sales team, like what were like goals and objectives. Like you guys have been crushing it for the last couple of years, and he's like, well, the lead sales guys, like I did $4 million in new business last year. He's like, what were you hoping to get? And he's like, I mean, as much as possible. Then he starts going over to some of like the service managers and like some of these other individuals and tried to understand like what were their goals and objectives over the course of the last 10 years that they've been working there. I think what they found out was there was never goals. There was never KPIs. There was not ever anything to strive for besides really high level, want to make sure that customers have a good experience, right? And they're giving positive reviews. And we're, being right by them. We're selling more business. And all he did was he went in and said, okay, like if you did 4 million, do you think you could do 4.5? Right? If you're able to do 5, we'll be able to compensate you more. What he noticed was 25% year over year top line growth, right? And then kind of across the board, they were able to figure out how to service a number of their clients better, and they realized that with the existing machinery, they would be able to actually provide different products to them. And it was a lot just because they set some objectives and goals, and then people were bought in.
So you got these folks that are looking at the business. It's almost like energetic, right? Like they have this whatever you want to call it, like this momentum or this energy. So they just kind of get in the motion of doing the work day to day and never really step back maybe and go, but why are we doing it or where are we going?
Yeah.
How hard do you find that that's like something that an operator, new owner can come in right away? And at the very least, like if they're going to try to do something innovative in the first, 30, 60 days, is probably just learning what the goals should be and then establishing them and then holding folks accountable to them? Or do you think it should be something outside of that? Because it sounds like that they may not be able to bring that same kind of just energetic, go get it that the original owner of the business maybe had that allowed everybody to keep going.
I mean, I think this is an interesting one. I think like I've heard it both ways, right? So I don't know, this is not going to be like the best answer, but like I've heard a lot of folks that will come in and they'll be a lot more patient with their decision making, right? Especially if they have like kind of a larger organization, maybe they're working like professional services business where they really want to just understand. Others are, maybe buying more of like a distressed business, things that aren't going well, and it's more like clear across the board. And they'll make decisions in quick shifts, I would say, into what they're looking to ultimately achieve. I think like the way that I would think about it is like who do you need to convince to make those changes, right? And like understanding their if they would be like willing to make changes, and if they see that there could be a better like outcome future for the business, right? Because like another friend, commercial cleaning company that he bought, all of his management were very bought into, he kind of sat down with them. He's like, here's the vision, what I see this business. And this is where I want to bring it to. And this is what it could mean for you. Instantly, they were all bought in on what he wanted to execute against. So he started making a lot of hiring, brought on a ton of new customers right off the bat.
Why do you think he had better luck doing that, where maybe another company might have a lot of resistance to, another owner might have a lot of resistance to to that immediate change?
I think it had a lot to do with the opportunity that they wanted. So it's like the aspirations of the individuals, right? So they've been
So they
working
were
there.
already aligned with what he was putting down.
Yeah, I mean, I think they'd been working there for 5-6 years. Things were all right, but more opportunity. Obviously, as a business grows, there's a higher ability to actually pay them maybe what they're worth if it's under what they think it is, or things are kind of just running like status quo and they're getting a little bit uneasy with it's not as enjoyable. So I think there's a lot of things, but it's figuring out what those levers are in the first place. And then you can really decide when it makes sense, right? If people are highly resistant to change, then you have to think about how you're going to incorporate some of the strategies and change that you want to do a little bit more methodically, maybe. Right?
Yeah.
So that's maybe why you have differing stories with this. And also with like sellers of like, do you keep them around? Do you not? In some circumstances, they new owner and CEO comes in and they're kind of everyone's still turning to the existing old owner and they're like, is this a good idea?
Yeah. Hey, Judd, I know old JC over here
He's
says he wants to do this, but
technically the boss, but does this make sense?
Yeah.
Right. In those circumstances, you usually see the existing owner kind of like, hey, let's, I wanted you around for a year, but like, I think we need to part ways here. Other times it's, very collaborative and they're able to provide a lot of value and they're still standing back on the, major decisions and they're not second guessing what you're doing.
yeah, no,
And that's maybe why you have these like kind of different views.
it sounds like the common thread is take the time to kind of understand the situation and
Yeah.
figure out where the wins are. And it sounds like, look, early wins might be don't do anything. Just let the team let you and the team ease into whatever new reality this is. Sounds like another win, like with your buddy there. It sounds like commercial cleaning, you said?
Yeah. Spotless.
Spotless. Another shout out. So Minnesota?
Manhattan.
So it sounds like another type of opportunity there where folks were like, please do something different.
Yeah.
And you're like, great, let me get a couple wins here because I'm aligned with that different. Let's go do that. I do think that like building momentum early on sometimes means you're taking action. And it sounds like in other ways, it just means you're doing a lot better job of just listening to like understanding, what the reality of it is. Do you find that a lot of these operators and these owners, when they're coming to you, they're pitching their deal and they're talking about how they want to do these things and whatnot, do you get this idea that they might have a skewed view of what is productive? And maybe point in case being, or an example that's going through my brain is, and we all suffer from this, which is like, well, if I'm not doing something, Judd, like physically doing something, making moves, then I'm not being productive. Where you might look at something and go, I think the most productive thing you could do is actually like the business has been running for 30 years is maybe don't change anything in the first 45, 60 days or whatever it might be. Do you see that eagerness all the time? And do you ever find yourself having to kind of talk people back?
Well, I think the biggest thing is everyone is optimizing towards growth, really, really aggressive growth, which, growth can be good, but if you grow too quickly and you start running into like capital issues, right, that's also pretty common, right? And now all of a sudden,
Grow yourself out of business.
yeah, well, all of a sudden, like your, accounts payables are coming in are longer than your accounts receivables, right? And now it's like, oh, we had to buy all this equipment, buy all this product, and it's going to take us longer to get the money back. And now it's like, okay, we've been growing 25, 30% year over year. Yeah. That sounds all good. And then all of a sudden you still have the same debt issue, and maybe not enough cash to actually like pay it off. And then you run into some challenges there where you've kind of scaled too much, right? So I think like flexible scaling makes a lot of sense where people will do contractors or 1099s in specific industries where they can flex up and flex down so they're not bringing on all these employees, bringing on all of this inventory, and then run into situations where they don't have enough cash on hand just because they scaled really quickly. I think back to the point of these businesses have been around for a long time, like if a business has been, sustaining a certain level, figuring out, okay, like who are those customers? How did we obtain those customers? What is our CAC, right? How much does it cost us to replenish a new customer if one churns? What's the churn rate and retention and how long do they stick around? Like really understanding that, like the core aspects of the business to make sure that you at a minimum, because, back to the 30-year owner that has probably made a lot of key moves to keep that business sustainable, right? You got to figure out all of those pieces as well. So yes, you are doing a lot of things to make sure that the ship is at the same level as it was before, because if that owner wasn't focused on growth, they're focused on something else.
Yeah.
Right. And there's not a lot of owners that actually are working 5 hours a week. The reality is they're probably working 60. So they're doing something, and it could just be keeping the business currently where it's at. So I think like being, if you're able to do that and sustain for the first couple of years, or at least the first year, you can still make some changes. You don't have to keep it the exact same, but at least how much you're bringing in and, how much cash flow you have, same level of customers, maybe diversify them a little bit. And then you can really start expanding on top of that when you have your foundation covered.
Yeah, give yourself some time to really kind of like get settled into what's going on. And I do think that that's a salient point, man, when you think about like how, because a lot of these businesses, the way they operate is not, almost all of them don't have this kind of traditional SaaS recurring revenue that's we got people locked in. They're like, they gotta go hunt every single year, every single month, every single day for their business. And yeah, they got regulars and customers that come back and all that stuff. But like if you're working construction, yeah, keeping a $10 million a year or $7 million a year or $5 million a year business going and retaining and going and just hunting to keep the top of funnel full is as much work as like adding another 6% of growth that year. And I think it's easy to just go like, oh, that'll be fine. And you work up the next year and you go, where's the business? And it's like, well, because you didn't do any of that. Did you do the trade shows? Did you go do this thing? And did you, have dinner with this referral partner? Like, no. Like, okay, man, good luck.
Yeah. Those are all things that you'll, and inevitably, like over time, you can, probably have other people that can help out with like making sure that you're at status quo. But in the end of the day, this is everyone that's working there is looking up to you, right?
Yeah.
Like you're responsible for all these livelihoods. Obviously yourself, you're put in a situation where you put a personal guarantee on this most likely. So your family as well. So I think understanding that is critical.
Yeah. I know we got, look, I don't want to expose all the good parts of Judd here. We're going to have plenty more conversations to come, but I do have one more at least to leave folks with. And then we'll get another session teed up for us to kind of go dive into so many other things that I think folks want to hear from, especially from your perspective, man. But I think the one thing I thought about was a conversation we had, I guess a couple weeks back now, where you were talking about where folks who are doing this for the first time should probably be thinking about, should I do it versus just can you? And we were talking about deal size in particular, right? Like, yeah, you can. You got great credit. You don't have a criminal background. You've got the expertise. So yeah, you could buy that $10 million business, but it might not be a bad idea if this is your first go at business and ownership to maybe consider the $5 million business, right? And get a wind under your belt. Just can you shine any more light on why that might just be a healthy exercise to go through, starting with a smaller shot group, even though some might argue that a bigger deal may be less risky or whatever it might be.
Yeah, which I do think that there's some merit to like, more infrastructure, more layers of managers or whatever it might be does provide some stability. And I think that's really to the counter of a one-man shop with a couple employees underneath them that were there doing everything.
Yeah.
Right. That's where I think it's like a very risky transaction unless you really know this space. But I think if you look back at like all the people that and a lot of these investors that I meet, their first deal isn't their home run deal. Right. And I think that's kind of the common misconception. And it's even for people that don't plan on operating this forever. Right. I think it's too much of this like 4-hour work week transferred over. Hey, get rich quick. But the people that are really, really successful that have made tens of millions of dollars owning and operating businesses, they started relatively small. Right. I look back at this guy I had a conversation with about a year ago. He bought a small junk removal franchise, and They operated it for a year, and it's a really easy, they have a lot of the education, they have a lot of the kind of back office. How do we do sales, marketing? How do we do payment processing? All that stuff was really all built out. So it kind of like refined down, what does it actually mean to operate this business? And like, how can we grow this thing? What he realized and found was he made a ton of mistakes, but he wasn't highly leveraged on this deal, right? So he was able to take some compressions. He was able to make those mistakes. They weren't devastating mistakes. And now they're looking to, add more locations and like really expand it, right? So I think it's like, if you look at the people that are the most successful, and they all started with a reasonable size business, and then now they're like, oh, they have this holding company with like 10 different businesses. It's like, yeah, they've been at it for 10 years.
Yeah.
Right. And they've also met a lot of other people that they can plug into these that are going to be able to provide a lot of value, and that gives them some leverage. So like, I always think about it and try to take all of these, hundreds and hundreds of conversations I've had with folks is like, there's a reason why they went about that. And you do see a handful of these like search funds, for example. Their average deal size is probably like 15 to 20, 25 million. Yes, a lot of them are successful, but a decent amount will go under, and that is you're operating a relatively large business, honestly, 50, 60, 100 employees for the first time. So the risks are a little bit higher. But there's no stopping you from doing that in a couple years if you have some concept of patience.
Where the opposite might not be true if you start too big and you find yourself even just mentally underwater. I think that's the other thing. You talk about the money side, and you also have the stress that comes with running a bigger business. You may not just be able to easily go back in time you won't be able to go back in time and just say, you know what, I wish I would have bought a business at 25% of the size, because I think I would have really got my arms around it. Again, going back to like learning the fundamentals and then getting after it. Now, I think that's killer, man. I think there's so much, and it's probably different for each person. I just know
Totally.
you well enough to go like, you're not saying this applies to everybody, but you kind of got to know yourself and then understand where you can add value, and then really look at what's going on in front of you with this particular opportunity and figure out like, does this make sense or not? Or are you getting shiny ball syndrome and you're just like, yeah, but that one is big.
Yeah.
And I can just be killing it overnight, and I have something I can go tell my buddies at this, barbecue next week that I own this big business. And we underestimate the fact that none of this stuff is just that easy.
Yeah, and you'll figure out what you're really good at too, right? At a small scale, you'll figure out what you're not good at.
Yeah.
Right, which then kind of maps out, okay, if I want to do something bigger, I know that I'm really bad at hiring, but hiring is key, right? Okay, let's go find someone that's really good on the people side that can like see characteristics about fantastic managers, right? And that's, every single hire I made crushed me.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go find some of those people that are actually better at it. So I think it's also like identifying where you're, really strong at. And I think you figure that out by actually doing the work. And then also where you're not as strong. And that's totally fine. Like most of these deals I see put together, they have really strong advisory teams from very specific backgrounds, because they're like, I know nothing about X, Y, and Z. But this person does, and they're motivated to help me execute it.
Yeah, man. Judd, I could talk to you for days, man, on this stuff. I do talk to you for days.
Yeah,
but thanks for coming on, man. I think I look forward to doing more of these sessions with you and the other teammates just behind the scenes. I know for a lot of folks, they gain a lot of value of just the beauty of talking to owners and operators. You get to dive really deep into the human story of what they've dealt with and how they've kind of navigated some things and how they've come out either failed or triumphed. What I think is really great about talking to some of our teammates is really kind of seeing almost like this pattern recognition that happens with so many things coming through our brains. So just greatly appreciate that. And I probably don't need to say this, but I will, man. It's a pleasure always kind of thinking these type of things with you, because you do have you don't have just like a numbers approach. You don't have just like a human. It's kind of like, how do these two things cocktail together to make sense? It's why I love the business. It is Wild West, because it's a little bit of everything, right? It's not just cowboys shooting guns, but it's also like you got to worry about the terrain and the horse and all the things that come along with it. And I think that's what makes this business and makes helping operators fun. So I appreciate the time, man.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for tuning in to the American Operator Podcast, where we celebrate the backbone of America, small business owners and operators like you. If you've enjoyed today's episode, Be sure to subscribe so you'll never miss out on more of these stories and insights from people who keep our community strong. Until next time, keep building, keep operating, and keep America moving forward.